Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Welcome to USA Prepares. This is your captain speaking, John Regan. Vincent is needing to get some farm work done today, so he asked if I'd sit in the big chair and take care of the show this morning. It's Monday. That means we have Dr. Norm Shealy. Good morning, Dr. Shealy.
Good morning, John. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. Boy, have things changed since.
How are you doing in the fake-ademic?
It's not too bad. We've been pretty much at home since March 1st. Everything's crazy anymore. And,
well, that's true. The whole friggin' world has gone berserk. But fortunately, we are still keeping the clinic open.
They're just starting to open things up in Texas. I believe it's a tad too soon for that, but what are you going to do about it? I'm looking at, in fact, this morning is a new headline. I didn't click into it, but South Korea is now having their second coming of the virus. And we'd already seen where Singapore and China have seen their second round start up, and they were ahead of us in the curve. So I'm not too hopeful that we'll see things better. We've seen where other countries that wear masks fare far better. You look at their rates, and they basically have the inverted V's where, their count went up, and now it's sharply gone down. And countries like the United States and Russia that did not do so, they got up, and instead of going down, it's now kind of going sideways. It seems like the R0 is hanging pretty close to 1 for these locations. You could spend hours just talking about this between what we're finding out now and it's kind of like at a loss. Where the heck do you start? We've seen where the first death in the United States was early February for somebody that had no connection to travel or people from China or anything. We've got an early death in France well before we knew that it was there. And I have to say Chris Martinson's done a pretty decent job reporting on things. I've been following him for years, basically because of his MBA hat and talking about, the economy. And back in January, he sent out an alert. He saw this on the radar. He has a PhD in pathology from Duke. So he's able to go out there and read the papers that are coming out and, understand them. Whereas, people like me, I can, look at the abstracts and summaries, but I don't know enough to pick out, problems in any of that. And we've got, he did some videos recently that I'm surprised are still on YouTube. where he discussed the difference between a mutation and an insertion. And there was an insertion into this virus, which pretty much tells you that somebody mucked with it.
Well, that seems to be unequivocal, and it seems to be due to the SOB Fauci. I consider him as criminal as anybody in the world.
And I don't know if they are going to be able to create a vaccine for this. If they do, it'll be the first time that we'll get a vaccine for a coronavirus. They've been trying, from what I understand, at least 3 decades to create a vaccine for a coronavirus.
Right. And, maybe once upon a time, vaccines were different from what they are now. But if they try to force it on me, I'd say, use your gun. I will not allow a needle, but you can kill me with a gun. I'm not going to do it. I don't trust them.
Yeah, I was one of those back in the 70s, when we had the swine flu scare. I was in college at the time, and I was dumb enough to go down and get the shot. Fortunately, no known ill effects from that. But starting, I think it was around 99 or thereabouts, that was the last time I took a vaccine, and that one was for the flu. And
right. Well, in general, and everybody is different, if you've got good health habits, and only 2.3% of Americans do, don't need to worry, in general. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that those who have poor health habits and already are fragile, if you will, are the ones who really get the problem. And that comes from being overweight, it comes from smoking, it comes from not exercising, it comes from not eating vegetables and fruits, it comes from not sleeping properly. And all those things are much more serious than the virus itself.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Becky and I have a lot of those. That's part of the reason that I'm so looking forward to when we can retire to Belize, and we'll have much better lifestyle enforced on us. They don't have fast food joints there, so there's not even the temptation for that. They've got the local food is healthy and inexpensive. There's getting sun, and because they're closer to the equator, you get a good sun year round there. We'd be looking at getting a couple of 3-wheel cargo bikes to ride around the island in, and I know that's going to be a process, be painful at times, but that'll get us in much better shape. And in the meantime, I'm doing all I can supplement-wise. But what concerns me is that there was finally a paper out of Italy that put together what happens when you have more. They've listed the comorbidities and the percents on that, but what happens when you have multiples? And from what they say, if Becky does catch this, she has about a 25% chance of dying. Because I've got a couple of other conditions, I'm somewhere between a 33% and 50% chance of dying. So, I'm taking this serious. At least on the plus side, there's also another paper that came out on vitamin D. And if your levels were above 30, which I think for you and me, we consider that still on the low side, most of the people that had that ended up with a mild case. If it was less than 30, then they divide this into the categories of critical, severe, and ordinary. Very small percent of people with vitamin D over 30 fell into those categories. The highest was 7% of the ordinary, and it was 4% for critical and severe. So I'm hoping, that's the case to help us until we can move on. But so much is out of our control, including renewing our passports, which they expired in March. We sent them in, and it so happens that the renewal office is here in Dallas County, and then Dallas went into stay at home, and the passport office is only processing emergency requests at this time. So even if I wanted to, I couldn't get out of the country, and even if I had a passport, I couldn't get into Belize because they've extended their border closure through, so I guess it's the end of June now. But they've been doing a much better job down there. They were the last country in the Americas with an infection. They're also the first country in the Americas to no longer have active cases. They had 18 people catch the virus, 2 people died, so that's like an 11% case fatality rate. But they did a fantastic job of containing it, unlike the United States here, where it looked like everything the CDC was doing was to make sure that we got a good foothold for the infection.
Well, I call the CDC the Center for Death Control.
I was, watching in January when they were still letting flights from China come in, and they were checking people for fever and all of that. And at that point, we knew that it could take up to a week for symptoms to appear. And here they were, just, hey, come on in. And now we even know that besides, a large number of people being asymptomatic and carrying the virus, that even those that went to the hospital in China, it was like less than 40% of them had a fever. So it's like, what are you guys doing? And on the flip side, they didn't block anything from Europe, and we learned how this has been going through Europe. And Italy's been hit extremely hard. Spain's another one, and we're still a long way from having enough people infected to where we've got some kind of herd immunity. What do we do?
Well, you just detach. That's all one can do. And it feels better than anything else I know.
This is Captain John Regan with Dr. Norm Shealy. We'll be back after the break. This is your Captain John Regan with Dr. Norm Shealy. We got a couple of questions that a caller had submitted to Vincent. First one is, why should someone take taurine?
Taurine?
Yes.
Well, it is a mild regulator or sedative for the nervous system. Every cell in your body ordinarily has a minus 70 millivolt charge on it if it's normal. If it's sick, if you will, not working well, it might be minus 60 or minus 50, makes the cell hyperexcitable. Magnesium and taurine work synergistically to keep that at minus 70. It's extremely safe. It's one of my favorite recommendations for people with problems.
Okay. The other question is, how does castor oil in the eyes affect cataracts?
Well, I have used it since 1970s to dissolve cataracts. I've had scores of reports from patients, as well as 2 patients who cured the cataracts in their dogs and 1 who cured cataracts in a goat. So it's one of my favorites. Now, it just needs to be bought at a pharmaceutical, at a pharmacy, not at a health food store, because you want to be sure it's pure.
And so if it says USP on the label, is that?
If it says USP on the label, that's the test. Just 1 drop in the eye once a day.
Okay.
Now, it takes 3 to 6 months. It doesn't work overnight, but you've got lots of time if you start early.
Okay, that sounds good. I was on with Vincent on May 1st, and of course, a lot of the discussion was on this virus, and the rest of the show was dedicated to the Greater Depression, which is now on our doorstep. I had done a show some months ago where I had talked about it's actually a quarterly, looks like presentation that the Treasury does, and we were already set for the federal government to be in really bad shape by 2024. And it is so unbelievable what has happened this year. And those 4 years that we would have had are now gone. So,
I don't know when it will declare bankruptcy, or maybe it never will declare it, but it obviously is beyond redemption.
So long as people still have faith in the government and faith in the dollar, we'll be able to string this thing along. But sooner or later, people are going to realize that you can't fix a solvency problem with liquidity. And that goes back,
You can't fix solvency with insolvency.
Problem is debt. Let's have more debt to try and fix it. But I think most people have seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And if you remember when they got married and they're getting ready to leave, and they drove by the building and loan, and there was the starting of a bank run, and they stopped, and the building and loan was a solvent company. They were making money, but they were illiquid because that money was invested in people's houses. And they took their honeymoon cash and satisfied people's needs. So what they had was a liquidity problem. Well, when you're underwater like the United States has been for a number of years, it doesn't matter how much liquidity you have, you're still bankrupt. And the more you try to fix that with liquidity, the more debt you're going into, and you're basically building a bridge to nowhere that is not connected on the other end. And sooner or later, that's going to collapse. We'll be back after the break. This is John Regan hosting the show today. Dr. Norm Shealy on the line. And I did want to make another comment on the vitamin D. We're seeing a lot of, in the wintertime, everybody tends to be short on vitamin D because there's less sunlight, especially the higher latitudes you go. But especially if you have darker skin, and the darker the skin, the more sunlight you need to create vitamin D in your body. And we're seeing larger numbers of people with higher shaded skin dying from this. In fact, here in Dallas, we had 17-year-old, beautiful young black lady, high school junior, with no comorbidities, die. And the one thing that keeps seeming to be popping up here is vitamin D levels. And I do want to thank you so much for, talking about your vitamin D protocol. I first found out, I guess it was late 2011, early 2012, there in Springfield, back when we used to have the meetups. And in all the years since following your protocol, I have gotten sick exactly once. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Well, and also remember, if one feels something knocking at the door, you just a little chill, something's wrong, take 3 of the 50,000, 2 days in a row, and then wait a month before doing any more. But it can knock out, if you take the extra vitamin D3 as the virus begins to cause symptoms, you can knock it out most of the time. I haven't actually had a viral infection in over 12 years.
So that's a pretty good record, isn't it?
Well, considering that I'm exposed to a huge variety of people, and of course I am a bit younger than my average patient. I'm a bit older than my average patient.
But there's a lot of controversy on how many people are dying from this, and even in normal times, I know doctors don't necessarily know exactly what caused the death, and what the real reason was may or may not be what ends up on the death certificate. But
well, that's been particularly true in this particular epidemic, or so-called, because the CDC has actually issued suggestions or orders that if you don't know what's wrong, call it the virus. And that, of course, is beyond science. But then, since when is the CDC been scientific?
But one thing now that we've got some time into this, because there is a lag on getting death certificates filed. But if you go back and look, and they've done this with a number of countries, the average number of deaths you have compared to what's happening this year. And we are seeing a spike. So unless we've got another reason for what's causing these deaths, the only other factor out there is this virus. Some places it doesn't seem to be having a big effect, like Austria has an extra 12% over its average, whereas Italy has a 90%, and New York is getting slammed. They are seeing 299% above average, and since people don't think in percents normally, 100% is double, 200% is triple, 300% is 4 times. So it doesn't necessarily prove it, but without any other factor out there, I do believe we're seeing that this does cause additional deaths, regardless of what is listed as the cause. Have you seen those reports?
Yes. But everything has controversy, so I don't know.
Yeah, getting the truth out of the government.
Well, it's not possible.
Yeah. The one thing that I am seeing more and more of, and again, I found out about this back in February from Dr. Martinson, is the aerosolization of the virus. And back then there was this case, and if you know the Chinese apartment complexes, they are huge. And while under lockdown, there was a case that was spread to a tenant many, many floors down from the person that was infected. And in the time since, I've seen 3 papers from different universities, not yet peer-reviewed, that show there's aerosolization. But finally, we've got a paper in Nature which is peer-reviewed, and talks about the viral shedding and exhaled breath, both the particles and the aerosolization, and also talking about the use of masks, which that was a learning process for me back in January too, learning that the surgical mask is there to protect the patient, not the surgeon. And if you're trying to protect yourself, that's where you need the N95 or better masks. And even that's not a guarantee. Plus, one of the other vectors, and there was another article just recently up here where if you get the particle in your eye, it has the ACE2 receptors there, and you can get that showing the importance of having eye shields, which eyeglasses help, but those aerosolized particles can go around your glasses and end up in your eye. And it drives me crazy seeing these people telling us how we should social distance, and they're there without masks or eye protection.
Well, went out to dinner for the first time since the big change on Saturday night, and their little restaurant, which is the most crowded restaurant in town under ordinary circumstances, was still, amazingly empty. And the waiter had on a clear plastic mask. I don't think it would be of any value whatsoever.
Oh.
All the other employees had regular masks, but he had a clear plastic mask in front of his face. Well.
I guess you give him an E for effort,
Yeah. At least he pretended.
Trump reminds me of a teenager given a all-you-can-eat ticket to a brothel and no condoms. I just don't get why he doesn't take this seriously. It's especially at his age and the way he eats.
Well, the thing that the greatest criticism I have of Trump since he ran for president is having Fauci out front. I consider Fauci one of the most evil people on the face of the earth. I wouldn't trust him to tell me the time of day.
I'm finding a lot of things trail back to Jared and Ivanka. And his family were Democrats up until the time he married her. Of course, they wanted to be near the power. And Ivanka turned her back on Christ to marry Jared, which if anybody reads their Bible, that has severe penalties too. And then there's the form of religion that he's into, and that's the Kabbalah, which that's mysticism, Jewish New Age, however you want to categorize that. And I think a lot of the problems that we see out of this administration is his loyalty to family. And I wish he'd fire those two and a few others like you've mentioned there.
Well, I consider Fauci Luciferian. Not quite as bad as Bill Gates, but close.
Yeah. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And
feed it if you can. Have a bonfire.
And I don't know how many shows that I talked about how technology is being weaponized against us. In fact, whenever you see technology announced, the first thing you ought to do is sit down and think, how would you weaponize this? Because that is what our government, that's what DARPA is all about, is taking technology and weaponizing it. And then what's even scarier than that, when you see reports on new weapon systems come out, that's the unclassified information. Consider what the heck is in the classified stuff. And this even gets into the effects of EMP on our power grid. Those two reports that are on the EMP Commission website, those are the unclassified ones. And Dr. Pry, in one of his interviews, said that he's been pushing to try to get them to release the classified version. And if you've read either of those, it's bad enough. I wonder what the heck is in those classified versions.
And where are the versions that aren't even available, classified or on secret versions?
One of the other things that's happened in this time frame, I found out about the classified nature of what goes on inside the Federal Reserve. And I used an example. There was a job listing for an inspector general position at the Fed. And one of the job requirements was the ability to obtain and keep a top secret SCI clearance. And that's the same type of clearance I had to have in the nuclear planning system. John Regan, Dr. Norm Shealy, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. This is Captain John Regan with Dr. Norm Shealy, and just talking about how there's at least some people in the Federal Reserve that have to have the same security clearance that I had at the Pentagon working on the nuclear planning system. And, it kind of makes you wonder, what the heck are they doing that requires that level of classification? I mean, it's commonly called above top secret, but basically what it is, it's top secret, but then it's divided up into different compartments and different special access programs so that almost nobody knows what's really going on. And that's just another way that our government lies to us. And these end up being lies of omission because they can't tell you because it's classified. Dr. Shealy?
Well, I used to call things BS, but I think that's an insult to the bull, and I call it dinosaur feces.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. What I'm really finding scary, I was already following the liquidity problems that were going on, and this happened back in September with the repo market, which most people don't even know what that is. It's basically where the banks lend to each other short-term, very commonly overnight, and situations get so bad that banks don't even want to risk an overnight loan like that, and it's collateralized. And that was getting worse and worse and worse before all of this new stuff hit. And to give you an idea of how the velocity is increasing in all this, and this is not even counting the trillions of made-up money that the Federal Reserve is doing. This is just the debt for the United States. Well, for the 2018 and 2019 accounting years, we ran up $1.2 trillion of debt each year. That breaks down to $100 billion a month. Well, here for the year 2020, and we still got until the end of September on this. We've already doubled that. We went from 23 trillion to 24 trillion in 5 months, from November 7th to April 7th. And then in another 28 days, we hit 25 trillion. So another trillion on top of that. And in fact, April alone, we spent more money that we didn't have for the federal government than we did for the entire year of, pick it, 2019 or 2018. over 1.2 trillion just in April. It's insane. They're saying, don't look at the debt. We got a crisis. We'll look at the debt when this is over. And, what we're going to look at is a hole that nobody can dig us out of. And that's just the federal government. State and local governments are in bad shape, and they can't print money. Companies are in debt. People are in debt. In fact, for the United States, it's getting close to $80 trillion in debt for government and private and sides of things. And worldwide, it's over $250 trillion. And we've stolen from the future as best we could. And I think we're getting darn close to the time of reckoning.
Well, I don't know how any government could ever pay it off. It's not possible, legally or sanely. But of course, in my opinion, our government has been functioning illegally for over 100 years because, in my opinion, the Federal Reserve is unconstitutional. And everything it's ever done is unconstitutional. So,
yeah, it's been all part of the agenda. You look at it, in the Bible, gold and silver are money. In the Constitution, gold and silver are money. And while that didn't change immediately when the Federal Reserve was created, FDR stole our gold in the 30s. And while LBJ didn't steal our silver by making the fake coins, all the silver went out of circulation, and they canceled the silver certificates. And the last straw that broke the camel's back was when Nixon took us off the gold standard internationally because France was demanding gold and we were running out of it. And you look at what has happened ever since then. That was the point where we've lost all grounding, and here we are
in Never Land.
John Regan, Dr. Norm Shealy will be back after the top of the hour break. In case you're just joining us, Vincent is in that time of the year where the farm is needing attention, and he asked if I would take care of the show this morning. This is Captain John Regan with Dr. Norman Shealy. Dr. Shealy, we got another question. How concerned should we be about contracting the virus from doctors, nurses, dentists, and being in medical office waiting rooms?
Well, theoretically, that's about as crowded as you can get other than the Metropolitan Opera or some such thing. So I think it's a possibility. On the other hand, we have been running full-time throughout the epidemic, and knocking wood, we haven't encountered anyone who seems to be active with the disease. I would say 10% of our patients come in wearing masks and maybe 1 or 2% wearing gloves. And I use a great deal of hand sterilizer, but other than that, I don't use a mask or gloves.
And I think it also depends on where you live. I think a lot of these types of offices, the people that work in the offices are probably going to be wearing masks, which would help protect a person. Now, what would concern me is you now have all these open dental offices, and if they try to run the number of patients through there like they used to, obviously the person being worked on can't wear a mask, and I would imagine some of that drilling and other work that they do in the mouth could help spread some of the virus.
Absolutely. A dentist is the last place I would go at this particular time. In fact, interestingly, I had a dental appointment, I think it was like the 20th of of March, and I showed up, and the door was closed with a sign on it. They weren't open. They never let me know they weren't open, but I wouldn't go now.
I just pulled up one of the articles that I talked about on the first. If they do develop a vaccine, no matter how harmful it is, forced vaccines were upheld by the Supreme Court in 1905. If you want to look it up, that was Jacobson versus Massachusetts, and it was unfortunately a 7-2 decision, which means that very tough trying to overturn something of that nature, which is just one of those other reasons I'm trying to get out of the United States, because I believe it's going to become nastier and nastier just from the government point of view. And if Trump loses this election and we get the nastycrats in there, I really hate to think about it. They've done so much damage to this country. Not that the Republicans have been, friendly to our freedoms, but you can look at the difference just between the Republican Democrat states. The Democrats are really, really clamping down on any kind of freedom that's left.
Well, they always have. I mean, that they are the party of no choice.
And the party of slavery. They don't teach that in schools, but, it wasn't white people that owned slaves. It was white Democrats that owned slaves.
That is about as true as you can get.
And it really drives me crazy. And I've seen, black people that are aware of history trying to, wake up other blacks, and they have no luck. And of course, a white person isn't going to have any luck. But why do we have 80 to 90% of blacks in America that are loyal to massa? They just won't get off the plantation. I guess if you get a free phone and free other stuff, and of course now the Republicans have even jumped in on that. Free money, and they can't keep doing that forever, and it's kind of like crack. You get some benefit, air quotes initially. But then it takes more and more, and then if you try to stop, things really start getting nasty. And I can understand why both parties are doing this. They're wanting to try to make things seem normal, at least until after the election.
If there is an election.
Well, I talked about that back in February. It may be the most unusual election that we've ever had, because we don't even know if the leaders, which are old and not in great health, if they catch this, we may have government selected by the Electoral College. And it's been a long, long time since we've had anything even slightly out of the ordinary in that nature.
Well, time will answer the question, maybe, but we'll find out when it happens.
And, with the permission that the Fed has gotten, they have been propping up the stock market. We get these employment reports. Hey, we've lost another few million jobs this week, but hey, the market's going up. It's just totally insane. Unfortunately, that's the limit of most people's knowledge of finances is what's reported on the news. The markets are up. Markets are up. Things must be great. Hey, let's party. And even with the S&P 500, it's like 5 of the stocks are like 50% of the movement there. So it doesn't even take much work for the Fed to prop things up. But what are we going to do? You can't convince people that. I guess some of the people that have lost jobs, you can convince them that things aren't as good. But for right now, the extra $600 a week from the federal government, a lot of people are making more money being on unemployment than having a job, which is causing problems for companies trying to open. And it's like I say, we could spend hours on this, just everything that's going on. And we're seeing changes for the worse that we haven't seen in our lifetimes. And some of these even beat the Great Depression or imagine the Great Depression or second to the Great Depression, and things haven't even gotten bad yet. And at least we're starting to see the rhetoric move away from the V-shaped recovery.
I think it is worthwhile my reminding people in case they don't know, that there is a way to, ideally, in my opinion, deal with all of this dinosaur stuff. That is autogenic training. I am most happy that in 1972, I practiced autogenic training twice a day for 3 months so that my mind has been trained in the technique of detaching. And that means if I can't change it, I will not waste my life energy on it. Now, having done that, at this point, in a 1 minute or less, I can detach from almost anything. And so I do spend a huge amount of time detached now. And if you've never practiced autogenic training, it is free on my website, normshealy.com. Sign up for it. Go in and look for Autogenic Focus. You can download the MP3 free of charge. If you don't want the newsletter, you can unsubscribe to the newsletter the next day or that afternoon. But at least you will have your copy of Autogenic Training, Autogenic Focus. And if you will practice that, it is the greatest reliever of stress in the world. There are 28,000 scientific references on how good it is.
And I would recommend staying subscribed to the newsletter.
Well, I do like to talk, so I send out lots of newsletters about my thoughts of the day, and we'll plan on continuing to do that.
Yeah, and all of the, I guess you would say, prepping that I've done, I never war gamed the pandemic, which changes things a little bit, not a whole lot. And I've done everything that I can do to protect ourselves here. Especially using vitamin D and vitamin C to keep our bodies in as good a shape as we can in our condition. And I've got a plan. I have to be a little bit more patient in that plan, but I've got something going forward, and fortunately we haven't been hit as bad. Becky's hours were cut 25%, which that hurts, but we're able to handle all of our daily needs. Might not be able to get the food we want from the grocery store. I alternate between a couple of stores. What one has that doesn't have the other one tends to have. And by doing pickup, I lessen my risk of exposure. So, yeah, I would like things to be different, not just in the coronavirus world, but in our governmental world. But, like I say, at least I got a plan, and I'm working on it. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that nothing bad could happen here. It's the United States, and they're finding out otherwise. We'll be back after this break. This is Captain John Regan with Dr. Norm Shealy, and I've noticed a word pop up over and over again dealing with this, and that is inflammation. And you look at whether it's the comorbidities, there's an inflammation, a chronic inflammation aspect there, and what causes inflammation. And some of that comes from food, eating processed sugar, especially fructose, processed vegetable oils. There's stress, which we just talked about how to detach, lack of sleep, money problems, and boy, do millions of people have that problem now. And when we look at what typically kills people, you get the cytokine storms, you get sepsis, and those are areas where if you've got the prep work in place, especially things like the vitamin C, vitamin D, it helps with those conditions. And we're now seeing this new problem affecting especially young kids, inflammation in the blood vessels. And unfortunately, some have died from this. But over and over, I'm seeing this inflammation. What are your thoughts on that?
Anything that goes wrong, anything that damages a cell in any way can cause inflammation. Now, there's one good aspect that I think people really need to be prepared and do. 77% of Americans live in individual homes. And the average home has a lot big enough to raise all your own fruits and vegetables. My vegetable garden is 50 by 50 feet. That's not that big. And I can raise enough food in my garden to feed 5 or 6 people. It takes less work to raise a garden than it does to mow your lawn. Actually takes less time to keep my garden going all summer, spring and summer and fall, than it does to mow the lawn. So if at least that 77% of Americans live in individual homes would plow up or dig up or whatever, till the lawn and plant their vegetables, it would solve a big part of the food problem.
And there's been a number of us saying that for years. And unfortunately, I think now there's some people realizing, hey, there's a problem, and they're rushing into that, and we're having supply problems on seeds and equipment. But if we had done that years ago and started getting those skills, because I don't have them. Unfortunately, living in an apartment, I got very limited ability to do much besides maybe an herb garden or a few plants in containers. Don't have very good access to sun where our apartment's situated. But trying to get people to do anything until the crisis happens is nearly impossible.
Well, John, I want to mention that at age 12, I personally took over my family vegetable garden because I wanted to. Now, I had no skills whatsoever. I've taught myself at age 12 how to work a garden, and I've never not worked a garden. Even when I lived in Cleveland, in a city, I had a garden. And it's so simple. And, of course, there's room even to have a small chicken shed and a little run for them. You can raise your own chickens and eggs as well as all your veggies.
And now you have to fight homeowners associations to be able to raise food on your own land.
Well, I think that's another court solution if necessary.
And we'll be back after this break. This is Captain John Regan with Dr. Norm Shealy. I think one of the problems we have is there's not enough people left around that have a memory of when things were bad. I'm referring to the Great Depression and World War II. My parents were old enough to be young grandparents when I was born. My mother was 36. My dad was almost 39. They grew up during the Great Depression and were adults during World War II. And most people my age, they learned about those events from their grandparents. And, of course, a fair amount of time's passed since. And, to hear the stories, and we've just been talking about, gardening, raising chickens, and back then was before the supermarket, so it wasn't unusual for people to do that. And, of course, with the Depression and the war, gardening was an important part of taking care of the people of America. And we've become so spoiled since. A lot of people think food comes from the grocery stores. And unfortunately, most of what they get from the grocery stores is processed. Use your expletive on that.
And Ross Hume Hall's book, Death, Food for Naught, published in the 70s, pointed out that even in those days, even the fresh so-called vegetables and fruits in the grocery stores were deficient because they were raised on magnesium-deficient soil. Cattle farmers know that the cattle will die if they don't give them extra magnesium. But fruit and vegetable farmers don't put the extra magnesium back in the soil. In my garden, I routinely add lime to get the magnesium back in the soil. So it is important, even when you're raising your own garden, to take care of the soil itself. And by the way, I use no poisons.
Yeah, and there was a Senate report from the 1930s where our soil was greatly depleted of minerals back then, and it hasn't gotten any better. And unfortunately, it seems like the reference material we have for the nutritional components of our food are based on old information, and now there's even less of the nutrients in there.
Well, that is true, and nobody pays attention to the fact that the toxicity of the world has, gone up hundreds of percent, many thousands of percent compared to 100 years ago. So that now, instead of what used to be called the recommended daily allowance or requirement for vitamin B1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, is probably 18 to 20 times what it was 100 years ago, just to keep your brain functioning properly. Because when your rain is filled with Roundup, 65% of all the rain that falls in this country has Roundup in it. That means legally, ethically, there's no such thing as an organic food today, because even in so-called organic gardens, the rain still comes down.
Yeah, and that causes inflammation and also damages the gut microbiome, which is most of your immune system. It's so frustrating, at least from my point of view. I learn these things and see all the damage and destruction going on, and almost nothing being done about it because most people are wide asleep, and our wonderful leaders are getting wonderful contributions from these people that are doing these things to us.
Well, you got to take care of yourself. You can't depend upon the government to do it for you. That's the bottom line.
And that was part of my decision of, working on retiring to Belize is, that you got the fresh food, you got the fresh fish, and fresh air, sunshine. I don't think it's better than that. But the other aspect was Belize is a poor country, and it's going to be a poor country. The United States, when I was growing up in the 60s, was a rich country. We were the largest creditor nation in the world. But by the 80s, that had changed. But people today still think America is rich. And that realization of, when reality strikes back, that America is the brokest country in the world. We've spent our future, and it's going to be a harsh reckoning, and then some people just be in denial over it. But it's kind of hard to deny it when it starts affecting you. But the future, even if you forgive the debt, you've now got all the problems of the pension funds, Social Security, Medicare. Of course, we get rid of Medicare if it gets people to eat right. It becomes a manageable situation. Trillions and trillions of dollars. There's more of a problem with Social Security and Medicare than there is with the federal debt and even the combined debt of the United States. We're talking about on the order of 220, 230 trillion dollars versus the 80 trillion of debt total. So just to get the United States out of all of that would take $300 trillion. We don't have it. And boy, it's going to, if you want to live in interesting times, you've got it.
Well, I'm glad that I know how to detach.
Yeah, and every time I'm on with Vincent, you sure you got enough bliss? I guess I forgot to ask a Benny, what did you want to talk about today?
I'm sorry?
I forgot to ask at the beginning of the show, what did you want to talk about today?
Oh, well, we've got to talk about what's important, John. I think we're talking about the most important thing in the world, which is the fiasco that's called an epidemic. And, we can talk about, in relation to that, everything else, because everything affects everything. Every thought you have. My favorite quote of all time is, thinking sets in motion spiritual forces to bring about change in body, mind, emotions, companions, hopes, and despairs. Every thought is a prayer. And so that's why I prefer to think about solutions and alternatives rather than how bad the problem is.
And unfortunately, our society has been set up in so many ways. We've got the mental side, we're assaulted so many ways there. You've got the physical side, we're assaulted so many ways there. You've got the spiritual side that, boy, the more I learn, the more I find how we've been deceived there. And it takes an effort to break out of that.
Yes, it does.
And unfortunately, from what I've been able to determine, it was about 150 years ago when the churches in America became deceived and chose the industrialization route, which has led us to where we are now, and given us all these ailments. And I was young. We didn't know any better. We trusted our parents and teachers, and they trusted the doctors and the government, and I believe that trust was greatly misplaced. But it's become so ingrained in society. It just saddens me to look at how just sugar, is destroying our health and longevity, and that's just one aspect of it. And to try to get people off sugar is nearly impossible. It's you could probably describe more how that affects the dopamine, and it's almost to the point of a drug. And I see it's like the first thing that parents do is addict their kids to sugar, and I don't see them reversing that, because the kids are going to be causing so many problems for the parents that the parents will give in and give them sugar. I'd love to see that change. I just don't see how we do it.
Well, I haven't bought sugar into my house since 1970 in any form. A little honey, but no sugar.
I was looking back recently. Dr. Lustig, who's out of the University of California, San Francisco, did a video 10 years ago. And, really nothing's changed since. And then those videos were more geared to people with a medical background than the general public. But there's enough takeaway out of there that, even people that don't have that education like me can understand what's going on. And, and it's kind of like I remember doctors in the 50s and 60s, promoting smoking. And I think most of the doctors today are still pretty much saying, hey, sugar's fine, just don't eat too much of it. And I see people just, might as well call MDs medical deities. They're treating their doctors as gods. And, how do you break through something like that?
Well, you keep preaching like I do. I don't know any other alternative. I mean, basically, you avoid most packaged foods. Almost 100% of those things that are already in a package have junk in them. So the only food I would consider buying in a grocery store is fruits and vegetables and meats and dairy. Anything on the center aisle is not purchasable. I wouldn't give you 10 cents for the whole lot.
After this break, Vince will be back with you tomorrow. This is Captain John Regan sitting in today with Dr. Norm Shealy. It's been great having this opportunity to talk with you again. People, I think, tend to think that all of our instructors are always talking to each other, and that's not the case. I also miss those good old days when we had the expos and, could sit down and, glean some good information. I appreciate your advice on so many things.
Well,
and,
John, I remember well World War II. It began 3 days after my 9th birthday. And even during the entirety of World War II, there was nothing like what we're going through now. It was a much more positive experience in this country in what we're going through now.
And, it's like you said, the best thing that you can do right now is start raising food. The more food you can raise, the better off it is for your family. And if you raise a little bit more, then that helps out the community and would definitely lower the stress levels there. And that's about all you can do.
Well, that is true. And so especially today, when most people have more time than they've had in many, many decades, probably, at home, is a time to retrain yourself, to use your brain, not to watch television especially, but to train yourself to do things that are healthy. And that means autogenic training, which we've talked about before. It means taking up gardening, and it means detaching from those things you cannot change. That is not different from being a Boy Scout when I was growing up. I mean, so you just be prepared, and Vincent and his whole concept of being prepared is a lifelong process as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think most people my age that grew up in the city didn't learn a lot of things that our parents knew. I was a Boy Scout, and at least that camping experience gave me an exposure to nature. We didn't have to raise our own food. We brought it with us in an ice chest. But, at least it was a start. And then, the first 6 years of my time in the Air Force, I was in preparedness, particularly for, how do we get backup service for our automation, our computers, which were mainframes back then. And that just kind of naturally, and learning about that, it got me interested in preparing for events, having a food supply. And boy, was I so ignorant back then. And even after the 30,000 hours I put in these last few years, I'm just a little less ignorant. But I learned some things that at least give me a starting point. I just wish I were further along, but compared to, unfortunately, tens of millions of Americans, I'm actually in pretty good shape, and I'm thankful for that.
Well, and of course, one of my favorite statements is keep the faith, baby, and that is what keeps us going. Faith that we can improve, that we can continue to learn, and that every thought is a prayer. So think positively.
And I know these coming years are going to be quite different from what people were expecting. I believe the sooner that you can adjust your paradigm to that, which, as I started off the section, is raising at least some of your own food, the better off you'll be. And who knows, we might actually have people start talking to each other instead of texting.
Yep. That would be an improvement in itself.
That's, the misuse of technology is a big concern of mine. But, maybe the lack of money will help in that area, too.
Right.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shealy.
Thank you, John. Have a great day.
You too.